Hello, and welcome to Composer Conversations. I'm your host, David Coscina. In this show, I chat with composer and app developer David William Hearn. Hearn is an English composer, arranger, and music producer based in London, and whose music can be heard in television shows, commercials, live tours, records, trailers, and films. Some of his recent work includes music for television shows such as Friday Night Lights, Dancing on Ice, American Idol, and The Voice, commercials for WAITROSE, Samsung, and LEXUS. David also provides orchestral mockups or additional arrangements and orchestrations for other composers on features including Mary Poppins Returns, Les Mis, Heart of the Sea, A Dog's Purpose, and the Chronicles of Narnia. Additionally, David is the creator of the revolutionary StaffPad, a program that was introduced in 2015 for the Microsoft Surface, which allowed notes to be directly written into the tablet using the Surface Pen, which then digitized them in engraving format and provided exceptional playback using expressive sample libraries. StaffPad just recently debuted on iPad OS in February of this year, with the integration of premium sample library expansion options from companies such as Orchestral Tools, Spitfire Audio, and Cinesamples. I spoke with David about his music background, his work in the film industry with legends like David Arnold and Nick Dodd, and the development of his renowned music creation app, StaffPad. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, strange times, isn't it, around here? But well, around the world, I should say. But I'm all right. Yeah, we're just working away, doing a lot of stuff on the app, doing some music work as well, but just sort of trying to do things.
So, what got you inspired towards a path in music?
Oh wow. You know what? I was very lucky. It was something that I always wanted to do ever since I can remember. One of the hardest things for a lot of people is to just figure out where they belong in the world and what they want to do with their life. And what, I'm not sure sort of the way that, at least in the UK, the way our education system is set up is particularly conducive to kind of funneling you to a particular path. It gives you a very wide base, which is great. And but you come out of school as sort of knowing a little bit about a lot rather than a lot about a little thing or something. Whereas I was completely, all the way through school, I was really not that interested in the 12, 13 subjects that they made us do exams for, but really just music, and was really all in on that. And ever since, I think 5 or something, I was playing the piano. My grandma was a piano teacher, so that helped. There was the idea of a piano was around already. And then, taught myself the guitar, drums, percussion, all that stuff was really sort of just a bit of a monster, just, 8 hours a day kind of thing. The original idea was to write songs. I just got really bitten by the songwriting bug. And in particular, I'm talking pop songs. The idea of a perfect 3-minute pop song was just so intriguing to me, that it could be such a perfect algorithm in a way that can speak to so many people in such a short space of time, make people laugh or cry or, feel some huge range of emotion in 3 minutes. And I think it's still really the only art form that can do that. I mean, you get some powerful short films, but, in terms of being able to put you in a place or a feeling or a mood, a song is just such a perfect way of doing that. So all the way through from being 5 years old, I just wanted to do that and learn everything I could possibly do to make that happen. So that along with the music stuff came, learning the studio stuff, because I wanted to make my own songs and record them.
Who were some of your earlier influences?
So I went through the whole being super inspired by the people that were just superstars. In the 90s, there were those early 90s, there were those superstars, you sort of Prince, Michael Jackson, those people. Prince particularly was a massive inspiration for me, because there was a guy who was obviously musically ridiculously talented, but also was kind of doing stuff that was new and different and exciting. I didn't really understand a lot of it because I was too young, but you could tell there was all these interesting sounds going on, and they still sound outrageous even today.
So you originally became inspired by pop songs, but clearly you have a very broad understanding and amazing skill set at writing long form pieces. I'm wondering when you kind of went in that direction.
Yeah, so I mean, when I left school and I decided to forego university. I mean, in the UK, it's quite rare these days for people to sort of give up the opportunity to go to university, because it's a wonderful thing. But and if you get the grades and certain things like that, then people kind of assume that that's the next step, because, well, so why not? But I was kind of itching to get going. I was ready to get going. So even though I came out of school obsessed with music, but I academically did quite well, But I just wanted to get going. So I actually just left school, got on a train, came to London and started knocking on doors for studios to write pop songs for. Have you got any artists, singers, do you need anyone? I can make the tea. I can work Logic, which was lies at the time. I could not work Logic. But I figured it out. And got into that world. And after a few years of working in the pop world, although the idea of writing the perfect 3-minute pop song was so intriguing to me growing up, and I just, respected so much the people that could do that, even the modern day people who were having those huge hits all the time, just turning them out just a perfect little unit of song. The actual business side of it and the industry side of it and what we were actually being asked to do day in, day out was not particularly what I wanted to be doing. And then an opportunity came up. We were working on an album for quite a well-known pop. So I was lucky in the sense of worked hard and just put everything into it. So I actually went up quite quickly in the sense of working for people who would be considered, quote unquote, sort of famous people. And that demystifies a lot of the process and kind of opens the door and you go, okay, that's what that is. And I can see where that's going. And you get to work with people who are phenomenally successful and have loads of Grammys and gold discs on their wall and stuff. And I guess one of the things that I've always tried to do is kind of go, so if that's where you get to, if you're really good and really have worked really hard, do I look at that and go, is that where I want to be? Because that's the aspirational bit, but is it really what you want to be doing? Sitting around still writing 3-minute pop songs, albeit with a gold disc on the wall, but maybe not necessarily the kind of happiness to back that up kind of thing. And I sort of realized that it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And at the same time, the streaming thing was kicking off, and the record labels were a bit confused as to how to handle that whole situation. And the idea of the recorded perfect 3-minute pop song that's made into a wonderful pop record was kind of disappearing. It was changing. Anyway, we were working on an album for an artist who wanted some arrangements done for a sort of pop orchestra, so strings and a few brass. And they said, do you want to do the charts? And I said, okay, I mean, I could write music and read music, but I'd never written for an ensemble of that size before. I think it was about 45 players, I think. So not massive, but not small either. And they're all good players, all of the, all top session players in London. And so it had to be right. And I found that process was extremely challenging because I really had to learn how to do it, but super rewarding when we got 3 months down the line and we actually got into the recording studio to do that final pass of the orchestra at the end of it. That's when I was bitten by that bug then. I said, look, I really have to do this from now on. And I'd always, as well as the Prince thing and the pop music thing, I'd always been a big fan of the kind of film music greats, if you will, and some of the more sort of romantic classical composers. That had always been there. It hadn't been my main focus, but I'd always had enormous respect for it and always had study scores and stuff like that. So it wasn't alien to me to do that, but it wasn't where originally I'd put my focus. And fortunately, that project, it was a success. I think it was okay, commercially a success, but more importantly than that, the people that I met during that project were fortunately, we got on well and they seemed to like me. So that led on to other things and it sort of grew from there. And then, just again, relentless. I'm kind of laser beam focused kind of guy. So I suppose when I put my mind to something, I really started to do it quite extreme.
Do you think there's a slight obsessive compulsive or an obsessive component to their personality? Like if you're working on something, do you hear the music almost like on a loop at night or wherever, even if you're away from it? Oh yeah,
big time. I mean, sometimes it's a shame that you can't just plug in a jack cable to your head and just, I should work on that one, really.
That'll be the next update for Staff Pad, right?
Yeah.
MIDI jack or whatever, a USB jack to the Thunderbolt.
Surely Bluetooth. Yeah, gold tooth.
Even better, right? What the heck? See, I'm dating myself. I'm still thinking of hardware connections. So, I guess you had more of those types of experiences where you just built upon your skills doing that kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could all. Off the 99% of the work I do is to brief. You get told what the sort of thing they want. So, as much as I wish every brief was, do something that really stretches and challenges you, it's often the case is, we want something that really doesn't command too much attention or something that just fits in the background or something. Because a lot of the music that we write now is, it serves a purpose. Mm-hmm. There's not the purpose is not to inspire people to write music. It's just to do its job. But for me, it was, I think any orchestral piece anyway that I've written for the pure enjoyment of writing it, you'll hear as basically a plagiarist. So you'll hear as basically just a version of something I've enjoyed in the past and wondered about how it's put together. And it's really, that's how I learn. You know, it's a whether it's, you can hear those Korngold influences coming through pretty strongly in some of those pieces, or the Vaughan Williams, or those people that I would actually sort of sit down and listen to hours and hours of music, and of course it's going to permeate and it's going to sort of via osmosis kind of sink in and have an effect. But to your point about university, I think one of the things maybe that it's incredibly good at is broadening those horizons. Because it's somewhat different now with the internet, because you can get on YouTube and sort of go into a rabbit hole of discovering new stuff.
Yep.
But previously it was very much, if you liked a certain thing, you'd probably listen to a lot of that. And it's quite hard to go into a shop and just randomly buy a record that would open your mind. Chances are I probably wouldn't.
Well, yeah, I think for anybody who entered university wanting to write, say, orchestral film music back in the late 80s and the 90s, academia had such a turned its nose up to music like that, and even 20th century orchestral repertoire. I remember one of my profs said, "Oh, Prokofiev and Vaughan Williams are very middle of the road." Middle of the road, okay. Yeah, not so much. And it's funny because at the time there was still a lot of that academic, the pure Boulesian, super complicated,
sure,
very antiseptic type of work being done, and that was expected of us. And heaven forbid if you actually wrote something that was melodic. And maybe USC and Berkeley are different because they've always been more pragmatic about what the end goal is, which is turning out people who can function in the real world. I think people can realize their potential without having to go through those formal channels, as long as there's the desire there. And obviously people have to have some latent talent for it too. It's like, it does
come, a lot of it comes back to passion though, doesn't it? Like if you're passionate about something, that's that fire that burns, and you have to do it no matter what.
So clearly technology, you were comfortable with it. What was some of the first kind of gear that you got that cultivated that?
We had a kind of a family PC when we were growing up, and it had a Sound Blaster 16, I think, or Sound Blaster, what's it called, a Sound Blaster X or something, Sound Blaster 16, I think. And it came with a free audio editor. I can't remember quite what it was called.
Cool Edit?
Maybe it was Cool Edit. We definitely, at one point, it was kind of like a light version of something. I can't quite remember. And the input was, the mic input was mono, but for some reason, I don't know how they built it. If you pulled out the mic cable just a bit, it would record to the other side, and you'd actually like track stereo and then bounce it. So it was basically like the world's worst multi-track recorder. But it was kind of enough to me go, you can actually record onto a computer many, many times and build up stuff, and for playing the guitar into it over and over and over and over again to build up these huge tracks and things, albeit in mono. And that was really fascinating, really fascinating. And you can kind of see, and even then I think my brother's extremely adept he's a very sort of high level computer programmer. And he was always doing these mad experiments on that PC. And so the idea that what you saw in front of you wasn't it. This idea that this computer wasn't finished, it wasn't fully formed, that technology would progress and it would just get better. You could kind of see where it was going to go even back then. And, that was remarkably exciting to me. On the music studio side of things, my dad was involved it was actually a regional TV channel. It doesn't exist anymore. It's kind of become what is now called ITV. But at the time it was Granada. And they made TV programs for the northwest of England and other places, but it was predominantly the northwest. And he was a studio manager there. So I was able to go in and see the studios that they would make TV programs in, and mix basically see the dubbing suites that they had there, and meet some of the guys there from an early age. I remember going to see Stars in Their Eyes, which was like the precursor to American Idol, I guess. And meet the sound mixer and sit there while they were mixing this. So it was one of those where like that early experience of, this is how it's done, this is completely possible, this sort of seems normal, was really lucky, was very privileged to have that, because I think a lot of people listen to music and probably it seems like some dark art form of how it was written, and then B, how it turned up on their phone.
I think definitely 10, 15 years ago, I agree. I think that the technology's been kind of the great equalizer. And I think so many people, it's so accessible now.
Yeah, definitely. I think when I was doing, so we graduated from the Sound Blaster eventually, and had like, I think it was Cubase, was like light, like it was like I think it had 16 tracks or 8 tracks maybe. I can't quite remember what it was called, but it came with another sound card that we had. It was bundled with the sound card. And again, you don't realize how kind of profound these things are at the time, I guess, because you just think, oh yeah, of course it just came with a sound card. That had MIDI input and stuff, I think, and you could do, you could kind of record stuff. And from there, I just went on and just kept, I had a little setup, built like little studio in my parents' house. And by the time I was 16, I was doing my little albums. So the idea that you could record and do all this stuff in a computer I was already doing it. It just seemed like the most normal thing in the world.
Were you using virtual instruments at that time, or was it still external?
Yeah, they had sound fonts and stuff. Like you could do it. It was like a precursor to that. I mean, they were quite basic. Some of them sounded all right from what I remember, but I was mostly recording guitars, pianos, drums, that kind of stuff. So that was where my head was at really at that time. The virtual instrument thing, I wasn't really that aware of samplers and all that kind of thing. But that PC was pretty lame as well. Even by the standards of the day, it was lame. So I don't think it would have even managed to cope with even a basic sort of Rompler or anything like that.
My recollection is that we've had virtual instruments longer than we actually have. I think it was Giga Studios was the first kind of intermediary before we went to contact based stuff, and then now we have all the other stuff.
I remember some of the guys that I first started working for had Giga Studio PCs, rack PCs that were just running Giga Studio, and they'd have some stuff there. I seem to remember the first time I was aware of that this was going to be a thing, sort of virtual sampling, virtual instruments, was the Steinberg drum. They had a thing called LM4, I think it was, and it was a drum sampler. All it did was, but it did it was realistic drums, and it was massive. I remember looking at the size of it and going, "Wow, it's a gigabyte. That's absolutely crazy!" And it needed 64 megs of RAM or something.
Yeah.
And you go, "No way, that's out my league." But yeah, I didn't really get too much into the virtual instruments thing. Actually, funny enough, until VSL and that, they were all doing their thing, but it was very much out of range for where I was at the time. And that's really when I was starting to listen to a lot more kind of film stuff, and was working in studios, doing the pop thing. But one of the frustrations with the the keyboard sounds that we had at the time was they weren't very realistic and stuff like that. And I could see that you could conceivably get a Giga Studio thing and put that together, and I'd used it with a couple of other friends of people that I was working with had used their Giga Studio systems. And actually it was at that time where the idea of making a sample library suddenly seemed to become quite appealing, and I think I reached out to a couple of people, and one of them said, I got this sort of basic demo library, kind of a really rough thing from a chap called Alex Warbank. You should hit him up on MSN. so I did for MSN. Anyway, and we got talking, and actually the long story cut short there is that a few years later we had done Cinematic Strings, and that was again, like we shared that vision. Alex and I are not that different in age, I think a couple of years apart, and he was kind of looking for something like, we can't get VSL, it's too much. There was Giga Strings, and there was some of the Peter Sidlacek stuff. Wasn't quite right. We were looking to do this thing and this kind of figure out the legato thing, all that stuff. So we went on that huge journey of creating Cinematic Strings, which was my first foray really into making a product that we ended up selling, and a sort of crash course in how to do sampling and an introduction to samplers and stuff like that as well. So that was quite a turning point for me.
Actually, I got that library too. It was
original?
great. Yeah, the original, and then the second one, and then the Cinematic Studio. It's really neat though to see how well regarded the cinematic line is too. People just have embraced it because it's the interface is so immediate. You can write music, and that's what I think everybody's looking for.
Right, and that was the big thing that I don't know if you remember the very first version we did. This was back in Contact 3 days, I think. you had a limited space for the GUI. You could only have a certain number of controls present there, and they were all very basic kind of things. And it was hard to use, but we'd used all of our mind power on actually getting this thing into reality. And then when Contact 4 came out, they made it possible to design your own GUI a bit better and do custom controls and have a bigger, and all that stuff aligned around the same time as I think I was kind of getting into the app thing and making the idea of simplicity and reducing complexity. And so the Cinematic Strings 2 interface was that kind of one of those early attempts at me kind of simplifying everything down. At the time, no one had done it. The idea that you'd have an all-in-one patch that was just kind of there and very sort of intuitive key switching system and everything. And then we just expanded on that a little bit for the Studio Strings. And then after Studio Strings, I went off and I was too busy doing the staff pad journey. And Alex has continued to do an amazing job. What he does fantastically well is edit those things incredibly carefully. He literally spends years editing those things, and it sounds like it does. It sounds perfect. Yeah, that interface thing was again like one of those moments where you can reduce this down to something that actually is hopefully useful for the composer, not for the computer scientists.
That's actually probably a nice way to segue into staff pad. And when did you first come up with the idea?
So I was, as you know, a bit sort of big into the sample library thing, and a Cubase ninja. Really, really was full in on the tech, but also very, very. My background is very musical in the way that I was thinking about it, and often would just find myself too kind of going down certain paths because it was the easiest way. It was the path of least resistance in the door. At the same time, because I was getting quite good at manipulating these sample libraries, and I had my own sort of sounds and things as well that we didn't sell, but we had our own kind of stuff that we'd made. I was getting employed to do mock-ups for composers that didn't yet have that kind of either the time or the will or the want or the just life is a bit too short to be doing mock-ups, so they would just hire it out. And one of those guys was David Arnold, and through David I met Nick Dodd. Nick was a really sort of fascinating, we're good friends still. He really did show me that the speed at which you can work if you just think about the music first and don't worry about any technology. And Nick can write a piece of music in the time it takes for my Mac to start up. He's written for orchestral. It's ridiculous. Yeah. And it was mind blowing. But also I realized that how these wonderfully handwritten scores that he'd write they existed only in his mind until someone took it and did a mock-up, because there was no way that the director or the producers were going to allow that to get recorded without hearing it. That's just part of the process now, that they need to be shown what it's going to sound like. So there becomes this kind of weirdly complicated process where you have this handwritten score that's kind of perfect, and you could just, like you're saying, in the old days you would have just put that in front of the orchestra and I'm sure everyone would have been very, very happy. But due to this feedback loop and this idea of tweaking, and of course all the picture edits are now changing extremely fast and you've got to be able to keep up with that, those handwritten scores were becoming so cumbersome that it was almost that's the hardest possible way of doing it, although it was the most musical and got the best result. It was incredibly inefficient, and ultimately the two things that make something a success are just simplicity and convenience. So at a point where you're going, this isn't simple or convenient, it's not going to work. So I was looking at this going, I'm envious of Nicholas being able to just do this, just being able to sit down and, he gets up at like 4 a.m. as well. I don't know what that's about, but he just music all the time. By the time I was waking up, there'd be this score would have appeared, and it's like, well, okay, I better get programming this, and then it'd take me 2 days to program it. And that kind of balance was so wrong. The 2 days to program something that had been written so quickly. And that was really the germ of it, seeing that very efficient way that Nicholas was working, and then the very inefficient process that it caused, led me to think, why couldn't we just have a score that you can write by hand and then hear and play from? It's just, that's the master document, that's the blueprint. Why does it get translated and all these different programs, we're going through? Ultimately, you go from a handwritten score, and it was going through Cubase, it was going through all that kind of process, and then it was going into Sibelius, and there's another transition that gets made there, and then any change would have to go around that loop as well. So very, very inefficient. And so the idea really came to a head when we were sat in Air Studios, starting to work on a bombastic film, big orchestra, it's a 100-piece thing, I think. And there'd been a printing issue. I don't think anyone's fault. So something had been missed, and or something hadn't, some message hadn't quite made it through. And there were people shuffling into the studio that didn't have any music to sing. There's a choir actually shuffling in, and they didn't have anything to sing. And Nicholas, over the professional, was like, "Nope, don't worry, I'll do it now." And he literally just did it there and then,
wow.
Which was great. Except, of course, it was then still just pencil and paper. And you go, okay, well, that's amazing. That now exists as a piece of music. But the process of getting that out to 40, 50 people in the choir is now, we can't do that. It's not going to happen. And it was that moment where I thought, you know what, we've kind of got a bit lost here in all our different technical programs and processes and things. And really what we want to be able to do is have a very direct route from the music that you hear in your mind through to the music that's being performed by the musicians. And that was the full vision, was you can just write a note and then they would instantly have it. And you do that with a pen because that's the quickest way of doing it. And you can do that anywhere and you can get carried around. And that was the full vision. But of course, to get to that stage is just mind-numbingly complex. So the first part of that was the handwriting recognition for staff pad, the composition environment. But the full idea was we were sat in that cafe in Air Studios, and it almost appeared like fully formed. The idea that you would have one day a system where you can write a note and it would just appear in front of the musicians.
Was this much earlier than the technology allowed for at that time? Did you have to kind of wait until technology caught up?
Yeah, this was pre-iPad. And so, yeah, I mean, my mind at the time was tickling away with things like, we would use a Wacom, like a graphics tablet. And, we might have some kind of direct sort of like projection or something for musicians, to kind of, so you could see it. That was where I was thinking. But the overall process, the sort of method was fully formed. And I basically went home that night and started designing what is now Staff Pad and Staff Pad Reader. But it hasn't changed that much since those first sketches.
And what does Nick think of it, actually?
Oh, he's a beast on it. Like as far as power users go, Nick is right up there with well, he's probably better than I am on it, to be honest. He's very fast. He's been using it not since day one, because it wasn't really good enough for him to use day one. But after about a year, we had added enough stuff, for him to start to use it. And he's been using it exclusively since, I think, 2016, and has written no end of films on it.
What were some of the growing pains that you first experienced when Staff Pad was released on the Surface, which was 2015, correct?
Yeah. The Surface was a lucky break for us. We actually were building this in, isolation, really, not this kind of isolation, but where we were just having a sort of a leap of faith that one day the technology would be good enough. The iPad was certainly not going down that path. Like the idea that you would be able to have a pen on an iPad was just not in the atmosphere. In fact, they'd specifically said that they didn't want to do that. So yeah, I mean, for the first 3 years, we worked on Wacom tablets, and there were some tablet PCs around. Samsung made quite a good one, actually. It ran Windows 7, and it was it had a Wacom pen, and so we had focused on that. But the idea was never really that it was going to be a commercial product that would make money. It was really, the idea that this would be a system that was available for composers if they wanted to use it. It should exist. We needed to build it because it should exist. Not that it was like, I mean, if you want to make money, you go and, make Tinder or something. It's not. It's like there's way better ideas out there for making money. But the idea that it should exist as an alternative way of working for a composer if they wanted to do it, that was super important. And also for my own work, I wanted to be able to use this myself. So yeah, the Surface was a stroke of luck in the sense that we were probably about 75% of the way through kind of, the sort of coding journey for version 1. And Microsoft suddenly held this press conference and said they were going to do the Surface, and it had pen input, and it was a tablet computer they were building themselves, which was completely out of the blue. And then Windows 8 was a thing, was tablet focused for better or worse. It was a tablet focused OS. And I saw, okay, this is basically a bit like an iPad with a pen. Let's go all in on this. Let's do this. This is the only way that it's a consumer-focused product. Microsoft are going to put a lot of money behind the marketing. It was at the time a good bit of hardware. You know, it had its flaws, but it was by far the best option. And Windows 8 had this whole new app model. They call them Metro apps at the time, which became a universal Windows platform app, and an app store. And this kind of took out all of the painful process that we'd gone through. But one of the big learning things with cinematic strings was the piracy thing. You know, we were naive to that when we launched it and suffered badly at the hands of those pirates. But it's hard to describe the feeling when you wake up one morning and someone goes, oh, you know, your thing is on like all these websites, and you look and it's like 500,000 people have downloaded it, and you're going, whoa. And you start to hear it. And I remember even being at someone's wedding, and this guy was talking to me about how he'd just downloaded this thing called Cinematic Strings and he was using it. And I was like, oh man, you know, it's out of control. But the App Store kind of solved all of those problems. You know, it was somewhere where we didn't have to worry about building a robust purchase system. And the other thing as well for Cinematic Strings was we had to build a website and a forum and a billing system, all this, which was a lot of work. And my takeaway from that was, again, life is too short to do that. But at the same time, the biggest issue was that no one had a Surface or Windows, and no one liked Windows 8. So from day one, we were kind of going uphill.
Yeah. Was there some pretty good response, though?
Yeah, so Windows 8 on a Surface made a lot of sense. In fact, Windows 8, when it was on any tablet, made a lot of sense. When it was on a desktop computer, it made no sense whatsoever. But Windows 8 was a tablet skin on top of Windows, and you know, the whole app model, and Microsoft did. They aren't given enough praise really for what they did with the Metro app and the whole WinRT, as it was called and still is called actually. They rewrote and invented swathes of new APIs and new. They just basically cleared out a lot of legacy cruft that had been in Windows since, you know, the early 90s, and built this whole new system. The problem was that for them, they had a really hard time persuading developers to actually kind of build apps for it, because again, it's chicken and egg scenario. But what they did was really good. So StaffPad on the original StaffPad on Windows 8 on a Surface had its flaws for sure, but the interaction, the way you actually used it, was actually quite nice. It had all these edge gestures and things. You would swipe up from the bottom and get a menu, and swipe in from the side. They had the idea of consistent sort of standardizing where you'd go to get print controls and things like that. There was a lot of good ideas there. And so the reaction was actually quite good for StaffPad, certainly in terms of what it was doing. The idea, I don't think we were the first handwriting recognition app. When we were building StaffPad, we were. But someone else came out with something, I think Notate Me or something, maybe pipped us to the post, I think, to actual release, which again was a bit of a surprise for us. But we were doing this all in isolation, so you're not to know. But you know, the idea that ours was fully formed in the sense of you could write with a pen and press play and you'd hear it back, and you know, you could press print and get a usable score. You know, it was a fully fledged notation environment. So the reaction was actually really good. We were also very lucky in the sense of Microsoft saw it as a flagship app for Windows 8 and the Surface in particular, and they are great. Their marketing team was absolutely fantastic, and they were all very musical. The team at Microsoft are wonderful people. They're extremely forward-thinking and extremely open to new ideas, and very keen to get people talking about and thinking about you know, the idea of pen input. And StaffPad was kind of a good way of doing that. So they were brilliant for us and highlighted us in all sorts of different ways. So that was pivotal really to getting the word out about the app.
You probably saw a nice bump when the Surface Studio came out, because obviously it's a much bigger sized interface with that knob type of thing that just looks really rather cool.
Yeah, and in fact, that's actually what Nick uses day in and day out. And he uses his Surface Studio.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a lovely piece of hardware. Yeah.
If you want good tech, cutting edge tech, it does cost. And I kind of hope, fingers crossed, that mind you, if Apple released something, it would be like $6,000, unfortunately. So, you know, they call it the iCanvas or whatever, or whatever they would call it. iEasel? No.
Surely the ISIL would be the.
That's really good. By the way, how in the heck did you keep this a secret that
Yeah.
StaffPad came out for iOS. It was like, boom.
Yeah, and the scale of it as well with all the libraries and everything. Yeah, basically, it's a very small team, and I have no friends, so the combination of the two things made it quite easy to keep a secret. No, we actually, the app had existed on Windows for a few years as an exclusively Windows thing because it could only exist on Windows. The pen input thing was only happening on Windows. And I was never really about making lots of cash. This app wasn't an endeavor really to become rich or anything like that. So, I didn't want to try and force it into a finger input kind of method or anything. If it's going to be useful, it needs to be really useful. So we'd focused just on Windows, and all the marketing was just Windows heavy and everything. So I don't think anyone was really expecting us to do iOS in a way, because it almost looked a little bit like it was a Microsoft app, because we'd aligned so much with the Surface team to do the marketing there, which was great. But also, it does have that kind of the side effect of making it seem like it's almost like a Microsoft owned app, which it's not at all. It never has been. Really, for me, it wasn't so much about the iPad. It was more about completing that vision of having the final bit being the musicians being able to see the music change in real time, en masse, like having an orchestra in front of you and being able to change the music. And to do that was always going to involve iPads, because you didn't need the pen for that. So we had to go back and rewrite a lot of the way that the app thought about music to enable that kind of real time. It's not even sharing. It's the way the document model works is very specific, but that we had to rewrite the core of that app in a cross-platform language. And by the time we'd done that, because the brain of the reader has to have the same brain as StaffPad in order for it to work properly, you kind of go, oh, we've done 80% of the work of bringing the app to iOS anyway. And then as it happened, the iPad Pro showed up, and they had a pencil, and Apple. I actually got a phone call from a couple of guys there who were like, well, we've seen StaffPad around on Windows, we love it. Will you do an iPad version? I was like, well, no, because there's no pen. We need a pen. And they went, well, do you want to come down to the office and we've got something to show you? And they sort of revealed this iPad Pro, and we said, okay, well, I guess we better get started on this. And they're like, great. So can you be there when we launch it? And I was like, when you launch it? So like 2 months time. I was like, no, it's going to take years to be. So that's anyway. We spent years redoing it, and the end result though is I'm really proud of it on iPad. It's sort of its natural home in a way because of that. Again, looping way back to the start of the conversation about the idea of the reduction of complexity, and iOS does that very well. So StaffPad feels quite at home there because it sort of exists amongst friends. Simple friends.
Mm-hmm. I was actually going to ask earlier about you always had your built-in sounds for StaffPad, which is something else that set it apart from some of the other apps. Where were those samples culled from? Yeah,
so we basically call it the core library. It's the vast majority of those samples are from Sonic implants or Sonivox as they're now known. Yeah, we did a licensing deal with them a long time ago. That's for the first version of the app, and it's continued on to adapt some of their content from their symphonic collection. And that was a wonderful library. I was always a big fan of it. In some ways a bit ahead of its time, but originally a Giga Studio library. And but the actual the sonics of it, the sound of it, is really good. Now, back in 2015 when we launched it, we've changed the way that the playback engine works entirely to be able to handle the giant sort of libraries that we have now. But back in the early days, we were talking about Windows tablets with a gig of RAM or less. Some of them had 512 megs of RAM and very, very small hard drives. So we had to be really quite brutal about the way that we handled those libraries. But weirdly enough, we didn't chop it down to the extent of leaving out articulations or dynamic layers or things like that. It was more about figuring out where release samples made sense, where they didn't make sense. Sometimes things were oversampled and you really couldn't tell the difference between one repetition and the next repetition. It was just going through it with a fine-tooth comb, and obviously we had to rebuild it all for our own format that we had. Even back then we had our own format, and then that's taken to a whole new level with the new stuff. But Yeah, there was Sonic Implants, Sonibox, very, very cool people there, very forward-thinking people as well.
How did you do this kind of Harry Potter's magic of reducing something like Berlin Brass, which the Contact version is 180 gigabytes,
Yeah.
down to 2 gigabytes, and it still sounds bloody amazing?
I had a couple of sort of breakthrough moments. Again, with these kind of little ideas, and as you can probably tell, I have some of those ideas now, which maybe in a couple of years we'll be talking about, but they take a long time to realize. The breakthrough moments for me were, having built sample libraries and understanding really how they're put together. They're all variations on a theme in a lot of senses. And one of the things that we noticed a lot with cinematic strings, and I'm certainly guilty of myself, obviously I have a lot of sample libraries and use them in my music production work as well, is the mic choices. It can be really useful, but 99% of the time it's not that important to getting your musical idea across. A great sounding string section is going to sound great if it's recorded from a deck of tree with a bit of close mic mixed in. You don't necessarily need to be able to just have the close mic on its own, or just the tree mic, or just it has its uses, especially when you get into surround sound and stuff. But for most of the time, I definitely just use the mixed microphone position. And we noticed in cinematic strings that pretty much no one was using the other mics. It was just a mixed position. So instantly that cuts down your size by 5 or 6 times. The other thing that occurred to me was that the world since about 2012 has made some huge strides in audio compression. And there's now codecs where you just cannot tell the difference between the two of them. Even the most discerning listener would be really hard pressed to tell any difference. And yet they're open source codecs that you can then go in and further modify for your purposes. Sort of literally royalty free codecs. In fact, we're using one right now. Skype has an incredible codec that they donated to the community, and we also so the idea that you could use very good sounding but lossy compression, which is a sort of dirty word in the audio industry, but it's actually fine, especially when you're talking about samples where you're mixing a lot of different sound sources together. So that's a big part of it. The other brainwave was that we do not need to be able to load, like when you're talking about a real-time audio engine that has its whole set of things that it has to be able to do very, very quickly. And the breakthrough for StaffPad, which is again part of its core design, was that it does not need to be real time. So, Contact, you have to have everything loaded at all times because you might play any notes on that keyboard, but you need to be able to have that at your fingertips. But a score is a blueprint of the future. It knows what's about to happen. So we can load just the bits that we need and ahead of time and do all kinds of clever stuff where we work out exactly what it's going to be using, and even do things like optimize the legato transitions dynamically based on what you've written. So we don't have to load all of the transition sample if you're writing quick, or we can load all of it and use way more of that sample than the guys doing Contact, and it sounds smoother. You get a much better connection. You get a much smoother line because we're using more of the real sample, and we're able to adjust that in real time. So this kind of offline sampler, I think it's the only one in the world actually that does this.
When the first demos came out and we were talking about it on VI Control, I listened to them. I said, is it me, or do these samples actually sound better on StaffPad? More expressive, the note transitions sound more realistic than the more bigger version libraries on Contact, or am I crazy? And a few other people said, no, it does sound better. I'm like, okay. And obviously for the reasons that you just expressed or explained, that you don't have it's not a real-time type of thing.
Yeah, the legato thing specifically is that you can't do that so much with something that you're going to play in on a keyboard, because the lag that you experience as a player is massive. And we get complaints about this, we did on cinematic strings. You have to have that fade portion of the sustain has to fade into the legato transition, then back out into a sustain. And to make it responsive, you have to either cut very, very close to the transition sample, which then sounds a bit unnatural itself, or you fade. You just basically use a very small chunk in the middle and kind of insert it, and it's kind of like it's like a mask. You're using it as a mask. Neither of those approaches sound great. Like the best way of doing it, which again is something you just can't really do in a real time situation, is to maximize your use of the transition sample itself, to use as much of the sustain before the interval and after the interval. And we're able to do that on a per note basis in StaffPad. So it's actually working out every single note that you've written and optimizing its algorithms and building your own little mini sample library behind the scenes to make that happen. It's phenomenally complicated, but something that I became a bit obsessed with.
It must be amazingly gratifying for you to hear all these people all over the world coming up with these amazing pieces using the software you developed.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, and it's great, and I love it when people send me stuff. And I was listening to your piece earlier, and it's really enjoying it. You know, it's just it's sort of mind blowing. But also, to your point about the younger generation coming through, I mean that's a big driving force behind keeping going with it and just keeping improving it, because ultimately you want, if you're coming out of school and going, I want to write some music for other people to play, and I think that's the big difference is when you want to write for other people versus just for music that exists within a computer. The idea of a score and everything could seem rather old fashioned and rather irrelevant, and the hope is that something like StaffPad helps boot that notation system into the 21st century. And one of the things I'm not you see it a little bit even today in StaffPad, we're not trying to keep the notation of the way the notation looks inside StaffPad. We're not trying to keep notation completely encased in like a museum and not change it. The StaffPad is definitely a cutting edge app in a lot of ways, and one of the things that we want to do is push forward with the notation itself where it makes sense to, and say, well, I know that particular way of writing or that particular marking was relevant because of this and that, but wouldn't it be great if we could do this and do that? And actually, you probably start to see some of the notation elements in StaffPad become a little bit more futuristic, because of what they can do and what's more relevant for today's sort of writing. Obviously, we'll just keep the legacy stuff around forever because it should be, but we're certainly not afraid of moving it forward.
It's neat because you have the automation lanes, which you can, so it has that element of DAWs in there, and sometimes it's a little easier to shape lines by using that and drawing that in versus using the traditional dynamic markings and hairpins and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea behind the automation and the tempo staff, those kind of things is being able to still have a degree of control over your playback and over your piece to the point that we need to be able to have control over that today as composers. We're often writing to very specific tempo maps, and the demo is a huge part of the end result. So you do want to be able to have a specific swell in the middle of a phrase, but you don't want to have to clutter the score with a hairpin just to get that. So those layers and those kind of concepts that, the tempo staff will automatically simplify your tempo map and just print the markings that it kind of thinks are relevant, rather than have a tempo marking per beat every single bar. So and you'll see more of that stuff in the future, like things that are relevant for us, we need to be able to do, but we don't necessarily want the musicians to see, or we don't want to clutter the score, because it's not helpful to see all of those curves and stuff all the time, but occasionally it's really, really, really useful. You'll see some stuff coming up in the future where we are, again, the idea was never to just keep it as a virtual manuscript that you'd kind of, you have to write as if it was a piece of paper. You'll start to see some things like the ability to quickly lengthen. For example, when you've got a note that is 8 bars long, as we like, maybe you've got some kind of nice held sustain note or something at the top of the violins or something like that. It's quite boring to draw 8 semi-breves and tie them over. It's pretty dull. Much better to just lasso it and drag it out to the right. It just sort of makes sense, I guess, doesn't it? You sort of be able to then shorten the note as well by just dragging it to the left and things like that. Dynamics, not necessarily having to delete it and then rewrite it if you want to go down a dynamic level or up a dynamic level, but just pull down with a pencil on it and it'll go from MF to MP and up to 40. So you'll start to see a lot of those kind of things that help, because we are in a digital environment, so you can break free from that kind of the analogy of paper. So for writing music, you really don't need any DAW concepts at all. But the idea of being able to lengthen and shorten a note is sort of just seems kind of obvious, and actually also might help people when they're starting out as well, because it becomes a very neat way of learning how the different note values work and stuff. So,
any other things that you can divulge, or you're gonna surprise us as the updates come?
Yeah, so there'll be some big surprises coming. We're working really hard on the updates. We disappeared or seemingly disappeared for a few years while we redid the whole thing, which was huge. That was just an absolutely massive amount of work, and not just rewriting the app, but also rewriting all of these sample libraries and building the networking system that runs the reader and the synchronization system as well. All of that stuff was just massive. But it was still only 3 years. So if you think about the amount of stuff we managed to do in 3 years, the next 3 will be pretty nuts.
David, thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I wish you all the best with your music making as well as Staff Pad. It's as you know, I'm an enthusiastic supporter.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, and we'll speak soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Cinematic Sound Radio. I want to thank Tim Burden for providing his voice for all the bumpers and stingers you hear throughout the program, and David Coscina for providing Cinematic Sound Radio's theme music. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please email us at cinematicsound@yahoo.com. You can find us on social media at CinSound Radio on Twitter and Cinematic Sound on Facebook. And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, please take a moment right now to rate and review the show. It really helps us rise through the ranks and helps potential new listeners find the show. And don't forget to check out Cinematic Sound Radio at cinematicsound.net.